If you want to communicate something successfully, if you want to get your message out successfully, you need to listen. And we have tried very hard in the past couple of years to improve our listening skills.
Although explaining the strategic concept is about where NATO is headed, it's also a golden opportunity to highlight and define what NATO is and NATO does in the 21st century.
Back when I grew up and I woke up and someone said NATO, I know what we were talking about. We were talking about the defense against an identifiable threat. We need in the 21st century once again to have a sense of what this NATO is for in a very different and very complicated and more complex environment.
Everything that NATO is doing is, in many European countries, immediately suspicious. And then it takes a while to convince the people that it's not. It should be the other way around.
Getting away from traditional old-style messages could make a big difference to how NATO is seen.
This is the first time in my NATO career where there have been more people in the audience than on the panel. So I'm truly glad about that.
The reason we focus so much on the new strategic concept being succinct, being easily digestible, is simple. NATO does have somewhat of a public relations problem. Fewer and fewer people in NATO member states understand what purpose the alliance serves. That is inevitable. We focus on so many different things. It isn't easily describable what it is that NATO does these days. And because of that, we look at low and decreasing public support for defense spending. We're looking at low and decreasing support for missions in which NATO is engaged.
Our constituencies, our peoples, they vote. They give us the mandate to decide on using force. And there is too little understanding, too little shared vision of what NATO shall do and what NATO shall not do.
The old strategic concept, by virtue of being too long and too waffling, didn't do that. The idea is the new strategic concept should be a tool for the governments to help restore NATO's reputation with our publics.
Involving the public has already begun.
I intend to make this the most open, the most inclusive consultation process in NATO's history. And I dare say, in the history of any international organization.
First, it is already a surprise, and that's a clear intention of this new strategic concept, to go to the public, much more than any previous NATO document. Not at least because not all NATO allies are very efficient in explaining their population, their electorate, the need for security and defense.
You know, the rhetoric is not enough. We have to be able to deliver, but that means political, broad-based political support back at home. And I think that is where we haven't been too good.
You cannot delegate the need to rally your own public behind you to NATO or to the NATO Public Diplomacy Division or to your magazine. All these things can support, but the basic requirement to explain people that security is important, defense is necessary, and transatlantic relations are the key of our security and defense, this is something that has to be done by the governments.
This is the great opportunity presented, is to cause people, both citizens, voters, as well as policymakers, to understand that there is a higher calling here that NATO performs, that NATO is the bedrock of Western European civilizational defense.
What the strategic concept can do, or what the writers of the strategic concept can do, is produce a succinct, easily understandable, and a stirring, if I use the words, document, which the governments of the NATO member states can then take to their public and say, see, this is what the alliance is about.
The process of drawing up the strategic concept already involves external experts. They know that having an understandable strategy could directly impact on everything from budgets to Afghanistan.
The more clear that we are in our final advice, these are the threats, this is the mindset for NATO, and if the public understands that well, the public will understand that you then need resources, that is budgets, equipment, etc.
And if people understand the importance of what this alliance is about, and they understand the importance of what we're trying to do in Afghanistan, then there is more likely to be a degree of public support for that effort. There is some uncertainty. It's indeed one of the reasons we're having a close, deliberative attempt to look at what our strategy should be with regard to Afghanistan and how to move forward, in part so we can better explain to our publics why this is important, why we need to continue, why success is important for the security of the NATO countries. The same is true with NATO.
And finally, it's clear that those countries who keep a close eye on NATO and its operations will be looking equally closely at its new strategic concept.
Of course, it will be read in Moscow and it will be read in most of the Islamic countries. But I think by being very clear on intentions, you are much more eligible as a partner for these countries, for these groups, because they know what you are talking about, what do you intend. So therefore, yes, it is directed to both areas, and I think the interest in both areas will be quite high.